chat, but I don't know if I can go back and forth. All right. So we're live. For anyone that hops on, we're going to be recording our podcast episode so you get first look at like what we're doing here. Um so give us a second. I'm going to get everything set up and the full episode is going to be uploaded what's today? It'll be uploaded tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Okay, start. Do we want to do a Q&A or a poll? Let's do a poll and ask people what they think about funding Ukraine.
Okay, I like it.
Are you for or against funding Ukraine?
When our government is on the verge of a shutdown.
Oh yeah, we should. Yeah, that's important.
Because that's really what this is all about today.
On the verge of a shutdown. I'm actually really excited for this conversation because I've got some opinions on it, and we're gonna hear about that. All right, let me get the podcast going. Hopefully, they'll be able to see me when I click back over. All right, got the notes. Where is my Zoom? Okay. All right, I'm going to hit record.
Okay.
And you start us out, Tara. Ready? Let's see here. Okay.
Recording in progress.
Hey, everybody, and happy Monday. So, our government is a fucking clown show. We've talked about that a lot, and we've been spending all of this money that we don't have, and most of that money has been going to everything except the American people. And now we have this impending government shutdown deadline that's approaching next Saturday, September 30th. And so, unless Congress passes a continuing resolution or comes to some kind of agreement, federal government funding will run out. And I swear, Stephanie, I feel like this is deja vu because we just had a similar conversation about a government shutdown threat a few months ago in May. But once again, we're in a situation where Congress and Biden have to come to some kind of limit to either raise or suspend the debt limit, or we can't pay our bills, which frankly, we aren't really paying our bills right now anyway, because we just keep extending our non-existent credit. But to say that meetings in Congress this past week have been a circus would be a severe understatement. The House has been fighting over the defense spending bill, and they haven't been able to reach any kind of consensus. I'm going to quote directly from an Epic Times article, which stated, quote, during the debt ceiling debate in May, McCarthy promised to address the budget concerns in the appropriations process. He had months to align support, even as Congress was adjourned over the summer. But now, at the 11th hour in the appropriations process, the Republican leadership has yet to pass or even debate any of the 12 appropriations bills. 2 attempts this past week to bring the defense appropriations bills to the House floor have failed. And on Friday, McCarthy said the GOP must pass a continuing resolution to keep funding the government because he can only pass 4 of the appropriations bills in the House before October 1st. And the hardliners have said no, end quote. So basically, we have a lot of senators and House members who are pissed at McCarthy, and you have several Republican and Democrat members of Congress that are refusing to approve the requested $300 million in security assistance to Ukraine. So we're a week out from a government shutdown, and so far, no agreement has been reached.
Yeah, and it's always the 11th hour, I feel like. It drives me crazy. And of those 12 appropriation bills, they only passed one before going to recess in August. So now they have to rush through 11 in the last minute. Like, why is this pattern repeating itself over and over and over again? And I was listening to a video that Marjorie Taylor Greene put out, and she was saying that there is absolutely no reason why they should have taken a recess in August when the government shutdown was looming. And she's absolutely right. And I want to play a clip from her video. It's a little bit of a long one, but I think it's important because she was one of the people that voted no. And she explains exactly why she did so. And I got to say that I agree with her. So let me play that clip for you.
See the news or don't know what happened. While President Zelensky from Ukraine was in Washington begging for more American people's taxpayer dollars, while our border is being invaded at record levels, and while the Biden administration has welcomed everyone to America illegally, we were able to get our bills done. So yesterday they decided to bring the defense bill to the floor. And I want to be very clear with all of you. All week long, as a matter of fact, all year long, I have told every single one of my colleagues. I have told the press. I have told my district. I've posted on social media 1,000 times. I am not voting for one single penny to go to a war in Ukraine. Didn't see the news or don't know what happened.
Okay, so I don't think the whole thing played. But basically, she told everybody that she would not be voting for this. And if they wanted the Ukrainian funding, they could put it in a separate bill and vote yes for that there. And they didn't do that. They didn't listen to her. And so she voted no. And then they come along and tell her, okay, well, if we take that out, then will you vote yes? And she's like, that's what I've been saying this whole time. I warned you, and they didn't take her seriously. And why would they? Why would they take her seriously? Because the Republicans always say they're going to, stand up to it and not fund it. And in the 11th hour, like now, they end up voting for it. So I'm glad that she's sticking to her guns. I think she's absolutely right. She warned them, they didn't listen. And um I think that she deserves a lot of respect for standing up to them, and she brought up a really good point too, that um you know it happens like every single time where they threaten the government shutdown. In the last minute they reach a deal, and it always ends up with Democrats getting what they want, because at the end of the day they stick together and they vote together, and the Republicans don't. They're so mixed, they can't get on the same page with anything. And in the last hour, they never want the government to shut down, so they cave. And then it just hands control back over to the Democrats. So it's like pointless even having a majority. It's the same pattern every time. So it's refreshing to see people like her. And also, you have like Matt Gaetz that's standing firm on this issue. I was watching an interview that he did where he's like, let them go ahead and shut down the government. And while I know that's extreme, like I get what he's saying, because until there are real consequences, the same pattern is going to keep playing out. It's like, when are we going to learn our lesson that, this needs to stop? And the only way there's going to do that is for them to like call their bluff and actually let the government shut down and then see what happens. And Marjorie Taylor Greene brought up another good point. She was saying, not only are we funding the Ukrainians, but the Biden administration just flew 200,000 illegal migrants into the US to 43 cities all across the country. They're also paying them thousands of dollars per month in assistance. And they're able to do all of this through an app given to them by the Biden administration. They didn't have to walk over the border or come in on these buses or trains like we've been seeing on social media. Our government just picked them up and flew them right in to wherever they wanted to go. And it just goes to show, like, it's everyone else first and Americans last. Republicans have to get a backbone and stand up to this. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene, she goes on to say how Republicans are acting like they don't support Ukrainian funding and they're not for it in public, but then they turn around and they vote for it in these bills where it's combined. And so she's basically calling them out, like calling out the establishment uniparty. And it's like, we're funding a war in Ukraine because Russia invaded Ukraine. Yet we're being invaded here at our southern border. And she brings this up in that video. We've had millions of people come into the country illegally since Biden took office. Like, that is an invasion. And then the other thing we hear all the time.
Wait, is it an invasion if our government is allowing it to happen?
Right. Or like flying them in.
Yeah, it's an invitation, not an invasion.
Yeah. And then the other thing that they're constantly talking about with the Ukraine war is like, oh, well, we're fighting for democracy. Democracy's on the line. Yet they're not even holding elections in Ukraine. But yet it's supposed to be like the picture of democracy. Like, give me a break. It's absolutely outrageous and it needs to stop. And I think this is going to be very telling of what happens.
Yeah, and our current debt is somewhere in the area of $33 trillion. And like that's a number that I almost find unfathomable. And that Epic Times article I was referencing earlier, they likened this by saying that this number is approximately $250,000 per taxpayer. Do you know how many people, taxpayers, will never even see that amount of money in their lifetime? And last week, Fox News reported that the White House has confirmed that the Biden administration has spent more than $100 billion on the war in Ukraine. But there are calculations by the U.S. Department or the U.S. State Department Office of the Inspector General that said that number is closer to 113 billion, because you have 62 billion being dispersed through the Pentagon, and then you have another 46 billion going through the Department of State. And in addition to that, last month the White House asked Congress to authorize another $24 billion in military and humanitarian aid. And according to the Wall Street Journal, 23 members of the House and 6 senators signed a letter to the White House saying they oppose that additional 24 billion to Ukraine. And so then what comes next? This request for 300 million. But apparently, even if there is a government shutdown, Ukraine is still in a winning position in terms of support, because the Biden administration last week declared that sending money to Ukraine would be exempt from any kind of government shutdown. So there was an article in Politico that was talking about how typically when our government shuts down, like, military activities stop unless they're deemed crucial to national security. And the article gave the example of how back when there was a government shutdown in 2018, we still had US forces continuing, their activities in the Middle East, hunting down terrorists. But here at home, we canceled training for tens of thousands of National Guard and reserve troops. So this past Friday, Fox News reported that Department of Defense spokesperson Chris Sherwood told Politico that the Pentagon has decided to continue aiding Ukraine if there is a shutdown, because this aid falls under what is called Operation Atlantic Resolve, which is a contingency plan that allows the DoD to make exemptions for defense spending, even if there's a government shutdown. So once again, we have the Biden administration making unilateral decisions and prioritizing Ukraine over America.
Okay, this is where I get so confused, because the bill that Marjorie Taylor Greene's talking about, like, if they vote no and that bill is what holds this funding for Ukraine, then how is Biden able to send money to Ukraine when he doesn't have, like, the funds, like, if the government shut down? So that, like, that's where I get so confused.
Yeah, because basically what they're saying is that this money for Ukraine falls into an emergency category that is outside of the shutdown. So, like, when there's a shutdown, you still have certain things in the government that still operate. Our police still operate, like federal police, military still operates, Medicare, Social Security, those things still operate. So those all fall under emergency funding. And so this money would come from emergency funding under that Operation Atlantic Resolve plan.
It's like,
So
what's the point of even having Congress?
Right.
Like, this is just insane. Makes me
It's a
so mad.
backdoor policy. Yeah, it's a total backdoor policy. And so Zelensky met with Biden and Pentagon leaders on Thursday last week. And after the meeting, Biden gave one of his, typical rambling speeches about our commitment to help Ukraine build long-term security. And this was when he announced a $325 million security assistance package for Ukraine, which, according to the DoD, includes more anti-tank weapons, air defense equipment, artillery rounds, and other necessary equipment. And so what is necessary equipment that's part of this new assistance package? Well, Biden met with Zelensky privately last Thursday. And I also wanted to point this out earlier. When Zelensky wanted to address Congress, McCarthy said no, there's no time for that. But then McCarthy also met privately with Zelensky. And I don't like that. Just like I don't like Biden meeting privately.
He's part of the Uniparty,
right.
McCarthy. Just like the guy that keeps, like, having strokes on TV when he's talking. Mitch McConnell.
McConnell, yeah. Yeah, and so after all of this, Biden meets privately with Zelensky, and he agrees to provide Ukraine with long-range tactical missiles. And these include, like, the long-range cluster bombs and warheads that Zelensky's been asking for months. But we've been reluctant to hand them over because that's basically like further invitation for conflict with Russia. So I read this article in The Guardian that was talking about how these long-range missiles, when they're fired from a mobile launcher, they can hit targets up to 190 miles away. So this would allow Ukraine to, like, penetrate deep beyond the front lines, targeting like command headquarters, weapons depots, supply networks, railways. And, we already started sending Ukraine short range cluster munitions back in July. And we talked about this on a previous podcast, how dangerous they are, how they kill innocent civilians, how they're, left behind and kids find them. And apparently, we're sending more of these, the short range missiles, in this new $325 million aid package. And now we're appeasing Zelensky's demands yet again, was sending the long range cluster munitions, which not only is going to continue to deplete our stockpile here in the United States, which is already low, but now we're only going to further escalate the conflict between Russia in the United States. So I guess we'll just continue to like piss off Putin and edge closer to World War II.
Yeah, what do they think he's going to do? Like, obviously, he's not going to stand for this. And I think that's what they want. They want to poke the bear, hoping he's going to do something crazy. So it throws them into a more legitimate world war so they can just spend as much as they want, because this is all about the military industrial complex at this point.
Yeah, and guess who else Zelensky met with last week? According to CNN, he met with a bunch of Wall Street CEOs, like all these big money power players. There were reps from JP Morgan Chase, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, billionaire Mike Bloomberg, New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft, hedge fund billionaire Bill Ackman, former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, which I thought he was dead. Like, that man has to be 100 years old by now. And then billionaire Barry Sternlicht. I don't know who that is, but
I don't either.
all of these, like these companies and these big CEOs, they all support who? The World Economic Forum.
Well, and I'm sure they're all getting a piece of the pie because they're all part of the military industrial complex. And I want to know, like, why don't they donate money instead of sending taxpayer dollars? Like, if they want to get involved with Zelensky, okay, you go and send some of your profits over there. But it's never going to happen. It's just going to keep screwing the American people.
Yeah, and the American people are getting tired of this shit. Like, we are, as much as even people who supported the war in Ukraine, like, people are sick of it. Even back in July, there was a CNN poll that indicated 71% of Republicans, 55% of independents, and 38% of Democrats felt that Congress should not be authorizing any more funding for the war. And I also read an article in the Lexington County News that was talking about how back in August, 70 House Republicans, which I guess is like about a third of the caucus, they voted for an amendment that would cut off all aid to Ukraine. But then, of course, that amendment was killed on the House floor.
Well, and now with the Republicans having a majority, they could use that to their advantage if they would all get on the same page, but they never freaking do that. And I don't know how anyone, I don't care what political party you're in, how anyone can support this outrageous spending at this point. Like, I get how people supported it in the beginning, but now, what are we, 2 years in, and all this money we've sent? How can they do that? And it's not just the money. I mean, the money is a huge thing, but it's the risk that they're putting all of us at by putting us right in the middle of this unnecessary war with Russia that is nuclear armed and is, buddy buddy now with China. I mean, it's insane. And I want to play a clip. I've had really bad luck with clips lately, so bear with me. Hopefully this one works. But I want to play a clip from Senator Rand Paul because he lays things out so perfectly and he makes really good points that the Biden administration really doesn't have an answer to. So hopefully this clip plays because I want you to hear this.
I will not consent to any expedited passage of any spending bill that provides any more American aid to Ukraine. It's as if no one has noticed that we have no extra money to send to Ukraine. Our deficit this year will exceed $1.5 trillion. Borrowing money from China to send it to Ukraine makes no sense. It's not as if we have some sort of rainy day fund sitting around, trillions of dollars in a pot of money. We're just going to send that to Ukraine. We're going to borrow it. When we borrow it and create new money to pay for that borrowing, we create the inflation that is plaguing our economy. Since the beginning of Russia's war in Ukraine, the American taxpayers provided Ukraine with $113 billion. Over the 583 days of war, between February 24th, 2022 and the end of the month, That averages $6.8 billion per month or $223 million per day. There's a lot of things that we need to fix in our country before we borrow money to try to perpetuate a war in another country. When will the aid requests end? When will the war end? Can someone explain what victory in Ukraine looks like? President Biden certainly can't. His administration has failed to articulate a clear strategy or objective in this war, and Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive has failed to make meaningful gains in the East. With no clear end in sight, it looks increasingly like Ukraine will be yet another endless quagmire funded by the American taxpayer.
So I love how he just gives a very unbiased, common sense perspective. And he makes a great point. What does success look like? They can't define it. They can't tell us. You know who could define it was Trump when he was asked that. And he said, I want people to stop dying. They're dying.
Yeah.
That is what success looks like. Stop the death and destruction. The Democrats have no answer. They just say, oh, democracy, democracy. They have no clear end in sight because they don't plan on ending it anytime soon. This is going to be another lifelong war, like Afghanistan. So, speaking of crazy Ukraine bullshit, I've got to kind of veer just for a second and talk about this insane ambassador to Ukraine that has just been appointed by Zelensky. So this is according to the Telegraph. They reported that Marina Abramovic is now appointed by Zelensky to be the ambassador to Ukraine. And in an interview with the Modern Art Museum in Shanghai, she said, quote, I was the first artist to support the Ukraine war against Russia and to give my voice. It is definitely a repetition of history, end quote. So I knew this name sounded familiar and she looked familiar. And I looked it up, and she's the one that we see in all of these Hollywood elite circles with people like Lady Gaga, Jay-Z, Kanye, and Kim Kardashian. And she does these really weird rituals. Lady Gaga described it as being stripped naked and sent out into the woods. And then when people reemerge from these rituals, they completely change. That's when you see these people all of a sudden start showing these satanic symbols in their music and in their style and performances. She's the one that did that famous dinner where she had what looked like real human bodies lying on the tables, and then they ate them like cannibals. And there's all sorts of rumors about this woman, that she's a Satanist, that she's a cultist with ties to the Illuminati, or even a Hollywood handler. And of course, she denies all of these rumors, and she says she's just simply a performance artist. And when you search her name, I really encourage everyone to go and search her on the internet and go to the photos. They are chilling. They have a very disturbing theme of death. There is a ton of satanic symbols, as well as child abuse. One photo shows her standing behind a young child with this sinister look on her face, and she's covering the child's eyes, and the child is naked and looks completely terrified and robbed of innocence. I mean, it looks like something you would see on the dark web, and it's one of her performance pieces. So this lady is up to no good. And she says, quote, I have been invited by Zelensky to be an ambassador of Ukraine to help the children affected by rebuilding schools and such, end quote. Very vague there. This is literally the last person that I would want being involved with schools or children. And I think it's very symptomatic of Zelensky to make her an ambassador, just knowing this is someone who has all these ties with this conspiracy of the elite satanic circles and pedophilia and the Illuminati. And here he props her up as an ambassador. I feel like it's a slap in the face to everyone. He's showing just how corrupt this whole war is.
Well, look at the military spokesperson, Sarah Ashton Cirillo. I guess she was just suspended from her service, but she's a transgender American who's not even from Ukraine. She was born in Florida, lives in New York, is like a total fucking whack job. And she was the spokesperson for the Ukraine Territorial Defense Forces. And then a few days ago, I guess she posted a video threatening, like, I was going to play the video, but then I said, oh, forget it. She's like threatening to hunt down Russians and calling them the Russian devils and making them pay for their crimes. And she wears like her on her military vest. She has this like fuck Putin patch on her vest. And I'm not really sure how like that's okay, but apparently the language that she used in her speech was not approved by her chain of command, and so that's why they suspended her. And I don't know if you've seen this person or any of the videos, but she's 45 years old and looks like a 12-year-old child because there's this like platinum blonde long bob, and then she's in a military uniform with like the cap and the whole thing, and this very intensive, like angry, seething tone to her voice every time she speaks. And even though she is a man and sounds like a man, but literally has like, I'm going to kill you eyes, these just very intense, just over pronunciation, and just it's really crazy, and it's very clear that this person has some mental issues. And so this was a Zelensky pick, right? And it only makes sense that Zelensky is adding to his troupe of actors by bringing in another fucking DEI nut job. And you know how you said a few months ago that you're convinced our government is basically a theater production?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, that's what, like, this whole war in Ukraine is a theater performance. Zelensky is quite literally an actor, and he somehow ended up with this starring role as the dictator of Ukraine. And he's surrounding himself with other actors. And it's like you're picking from the crazy pile. And I feel like there's this contest going on between the US and Ukraine about who can put more ridiculous clown people in positions of power.
Yeah, and he's had all of these actors and like that Greta Thunberg and now this Marina Abramovic. And then have you seen any of the videos from his acting career? They are like multiple videos of him dressed as a woman, like dancing. And it's just like, I feel like everything they're doing is symbolic of this weird, freaking cultish elite group. And it just freaks me out. Like, I don't think there's any good intentions behind any of it.
No, just like there's no good intentions behind our current federal administration. And I want to talk some more about what it would mean for America and just regular, normal, everyday Americans if Congress does not come to an agreement and there is a government shutdown. So I'm going to switch gears from Ukraine for a minute here. So, members of Congress, if there's a shutdown, they're still going to continue to get paid. Doesn't affect their salaries. The US Postal Service will continue to run because that falls under that emergency category, along with active duty military personnel. And thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRS will also remain fully staffed to make sure that we all pay our taxes. But aside from them, there are going to be thousands of federal workers that are going to get furloughed. And what that means is that everyone else is going to get fucked because it all trickles downwards. And especially all of the poor people who vote for this liberal shit and all of this extensive spending because they rely on government assistance. So if a government shutdown occurs, all of the non essential government jobs and spending will come to a halt. And it's going to affect lower income people the most. And so there was an article in the Federal News Network that came out a few days ago, and it said up to 2.2 million civilian federal employees face the possibility of furlough or work without pay if Congress doesn't reach this agreement on federal spending by this coming Friday. And the article also stated that during the last government shutdown, there were roughly 800,000 federal employees that were furloughed, which is like 40% of the federal workforce. And the last time there was a partial federal government shutdown was in 2018, 2019, and that lasted for like 5 weeks. And according to a report by Politico, this shutdown cost the United States economy approximately $3 billion even after operations resumed. And I was reading an article in the Tampa Bay Times about how the Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the 2018-2019 shutdown reduced economic output in the United States by $11 billion in the following 2 quarters. So if there is another shutdown, even though Ukraine will still get money and mail service will continue and social security checks will still be mailed out, there will be far reaching impacts because in this country, they have gotten us to the point where they have basically forced Americans to rely on federal funding. And so I want to summarize like some of what was in this Politico article. So the Department of Health and Human Services, they're expecting to furlough 42% of their workforce. So this includes like their support staff, all their grant processors. So as I mentioned before, like Medicare and Medicaid are still going to run because those are mandatory programs and they're not subject to annual appropriations, but they only have a certain number of money. So depending on how long the shutdown lasts, they only have enough funding for the remainder of the calendar year. And then after that, states are going to have to use their own money to fund grant programs for like lower income households that are typically funded by the feds. And then speaking of lower income households, as I said earlier, they're going to be the most affected because all of these programs that are funded by the federal government, like SNAP, like even though SNAP's going to stay in operation, that doesn't mean they'll have the resources to keep running. And apparently, during the last shutdown for the 5 weeks, SNAP nearly ran out of funds. And the USDA is predicting that if there is a shutdown this week, that nearly 7 million pregnant and postpartum recipients of supplemental food aid and their children will likely lose access to WIC, which is that like women, infants, and children program, because the USDA doesn't have sufficient funding to support normal WIC operations beyond a few days. Like a
Yeah.
few days.
So they're not going to support that so that children could eat, but they'll probably still pay for abortions for anyone that wants
Yeah.
them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And so once again, like the states are going to have to step up and contribute their own funds. Look at like the Head Start program. You know, that's the program that gives kids free or low cost meals at school. So that would come to a halt because that depends on DHHS funding. And that will have a spiral effect because this article was explaining that you're going to have a bunch of parents who are getting furloughed from their jobs. So now you're going to have thousands of more kids who are eligible for these free meals with no free meals to be had. And then here's an interesting one that maybe you haven't thought about. A shutdown would have a huge impact on the Federal Aviation Administration because apparently they account for 80% of the Department of Transportation. And so while you're going to have many FAA employees that are going to keep their jobs because they're deemed essential, the political article was political can't speak Politico article was stating that training new air traffic control specialists would stop, and then so would like aviation rulemaking, facility security inspections, development and testing of new technology and safety standards, law enforcement assistance support, and basically most functions related to finance and budgeting and administration. And 3/4 of the Department of Transportation's Inspector General's office would be furloughed, and like technicians and inspectors that work for the FAA as contractors would be furloughed. So this has the potential to be very damaging to travel. And I also read an article in the Arkansas News about how a government shutdown will affect the Farm Bill because the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the National Agricultural Statistics Service will be closed. This may seem like it's not a big deal, but when they're closed, they don't collect statistics. And I don't understand what all of this means, but basically like there won't be acreage reports, so there won't be payments, and so agricultural risk and price coverage programs won't have funding, which means farmers won't get paid or be protected by crop insurance because all of these programs are federally subsidized. And the current farm bill, I guess, is only temporary. Like one expires October 1st and then another part of it expires in December. And if this bill lapses, farm commodity programs like automatically revert back to these permanent provisions from like 1938 and 1949 farm bills that apparently never expire. So unless we, renew the current bills, they automatically default back to these older bills. And those older bills only support dairy, wheat, rice, cotton, and corn. They don't support soybeans, peanuts, sugar, and other commodities that we have come to depend on. So if this current farm bill expires, like food prices are going to fucking skyrocket.
Okay, here's where I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off, but I think that this is the opportunity for Republicans to put their foot down and put pressure on the Democrats. I mean, how often, Tara, have we said that there is just too much government spending, too much government control, too many people taking advantage of the system, and yet the same shit keeps getting approved year after year? You know what I mean? And so I think that if the government did shut down, let the Democrats explain to the American people why they can send all of this money to Ukraine and take care of their Ukrainians and protect their border while the American people are suffering. And if food prices go sky high in an election year, which I think they're going to anyways, just looking at the fact that the energy costs are going through the roof, you better believe people are going to vote Biden out. And like, I feel like government shutdown is really the only leverage the Republicans have. Like, the House controls the money for America. And if they keep doing what they've been doing, which is last minute caving in and funding this insanity, it's never going to end. It's like, just like Einstein said, you can't do the same thing over and over and over again and expect different results. And so it's like, if you keep giving a drug addict money for drugs, they're going to keep doing drugs. Like, if we keep funding this war that's draining America, the war is never going to end. Like, they're just going to keep doing the same thing. And it's putting us in the middle of a potential nuclear conflict with Russia. Like, there are huge stakes at risk. And I know, like, everything you just said sounds really awful. And I don't want that to happen. But what is like the lesser of two evils? Because I feel like that is what we're dealing with right now. And I think that if the government shuts down and all of this funding goes away and prices skyrocket, I don't think people are going to blame Republicans. I mean, I'm sure CNN and MSNBC will. They're going to look at the Biden administration and say, why the fuck are you sending all this money to Ukraine and taking care of all of these illegal migrants when people can't afford the basic necessities? And
Yeah.
honestly, like, I think that's the only way we're going to get out of this mess. And I think that's what Matt Gaetz was trying to explain. Um, and it sucks either way, but again, it's like we got to look long term at what's going to happen. And it's like, if you give your kid a credit card and they keep maxing it out and spending it on things they shouldn't spend it on, would you keep funding their credit card? No. Like, you would cut that shit up and say you're done. So I don't know. I just feel like we've got to take a stand or this is going to keep happening. And they probably will. I am betting money that the Republicans will cave and all of this stuff's going to get approved, including, unlimited money to Ukraine.
Yeah, because the cost of a shutdown is so far reaching.
Mhm.
And like the Republicans, as you were saying, like they don't stand their ground. And if they do, the Biden administration will inevitably, I will bet money on this, find some way to blame it all on Trump. Like everything that the Biden administration has destroyed in the last 2 years is always blamed on Trump.
Mhm.
So I'm very curious to see how things go down this week. I agree with you that I think a shutdown is probably the only way to really open some people's eyes, but I I also don't know that it's going to happen because they always cave.
Yeah.
So we'll
Well,
see.
it'll be very telling. And